to begin with. You can't oppose. You have to be for something. And so the emerging church question is, what are you in love with? What have you fallen in love with? What do you believe in? Not who's going to hell, right? But what is the heaven that I have discovered? So let me stop at that, and we'll take a little break. And I see that some of the questions are already coming in. And Stephen will ask me those questions, and I'll do the best I can. So let's take a short little stand-up break, and we'll be back in a minute. Thank you. Good.
Did you ever get that? Yeah. When people are finished, they can pass it. We have a lot of viewers. That's very good. Oh, okay. When they, I think, you know, Spanish. Yeah, no, I know. Somebody has to stand on that side of the room and bring more real. Yeah, maybe great. And then it was just top.
So we could have everyone start returning to their seats. Audience, we could have everyone return, please.
Venus wants to be on camera again.
So we're on, John? Yep. All right. So thank you, and continue to please send your questions in. But we'll begin with this first one from Mary Jane in Fort Worth, Texas, who asks, Richard, do we really need an organized church? Can we get the message of Jesus from the Bible?
Yes, I think we need an organized something. Or otherwise what we have is no continuity, no accountability, and almost total individualism. I think if it's each private person with his or her Bible, we're never going to create a movement that's going to change history. If we believe that the gospel is about changing history and not just changing individuals, then we have to risk socialization. We have to risk being in communities, in groups, that we come to consensus on this. I think we overplayed the organized religion card. In fact, it was the only game in town. And that's what we are moving beyond. But I think it would be naive and even destructive to think that this is going to happen by isolated individuals reading the Bible. Whenever you believe in something, you want to gather together with other people to deepen that, to broaden that, to critique that. And so I wouldn't say that some notion of church maybe not our notion, but even Jesus, 2 or 3 gathered in my name, is pretty basic. Or otherwise, we end up with a non-historical religion that is merely individualistic and is not going to affect history very much at all. At least that's my opinion.
This question comes from Renee in New Jersey, and we're already seeing a number of questions like this. But what advice, Father Richard, do you have for 1 or 2 persons trying to live the third way alone in a congregation that doesn't receive it?
No. Well, I'm sure you're speaking for an awful lot of people. Because we grow up at varying paces and degrees, we find there's always, inside of every group, some people who are with us, some who aren't there yet. And as people like Fowler and Kohlberg are telling us, you can never understand anybody, even 2 steps beyond yourself. In fact, they seem wrong to you. But you need these leaven people, these yeast people, as Jesus called it, inside of a group to call the group to a higher level. Now, that's the group that Jesus warns is going to be persecuted, is going to be misunderstood. So if that comes your way, remember it was promised, it was foretold. If you can't put up with a certain degree of dissonance, a certain degree of ambiguity, if you yourself have to have absolute certitude that you're 100% right, you're going to stop growing and you're not going to grow up the group either. So there's probably a cutoff point, however. Let's say if there's really only 3 people inside of a group of 500 who all hate you, and you leave church every week just discouraged and angry and upset, you probably need to go somewhere where you know you're not crazy, right? And that's exactly why this alternative group is emerging. I don't think Jesus is calling us to seek martyrdom over here or to seek to be hated, because that can be an ego trip too, where you like to see yourself as the contrarian or the oppositional party to all these stupid people. But as long as God has given you the grace to still love and be patient and partially understanding of the people on this side, I think God might be calling you to stay there. When you no longer have that grace, when you no longer have the gift to love and be patient with the group that you are a part of, then maybe you need to put a stronger foot over here for a while. And find your strength, find your validation, go deeper in prayer, go deeper in facing your own shadow side and your own personality limitations. But eventually, remember, eventually you've got to come back over here somehow. Or otherwise, you know what happens? This becomes the new country club. Do you understand? And we don't need another country club of a bunch of people scratching one another's backs. Aren't we wonderful? Right? You always need a certain degree of dissonance, a certain degree of disagreement, a certain degree of good stress, to refine your own thinking and to really to refine your own heart.
David Carter from Thessalonica, Greece, asked, you
Wow.
mentioned
The book of Thessalonians came from your city.
you mentioned that Jesus probably didn't mean to start a religion called Christianity, but rather meant to reform Judaism and in turn all other religions. What place then do you think Jesus has in other religions and belief systems?
Here's what I think is Christianity's big trump card, if I can call it that. The first card we should really throw on the table. The unique message of Christianity is that the human and the divine can coexist in one place. Right? Now, you find mystics in all religions have come to that same conclusion. Maybe they wouldn't say it that way. but each in their own way recognize that God is not out there, that spirituality and materiality are not two different realms, but in fact, one is the external and the other is the internal of the same thing. Now, Jesus puts that together in his living body. My opinion is, whenever you get that, and I have found people who got that integration in Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Islam, usually it's at the more mature levels, admittedly, of all those religions. But once you move to that integration, you are, I'm going to put it that way, you are the second coming of Christ. Really, I mean that. This is the Christ mystery. And that's why Jesus said, don't just believe those who say, Lord, Lord, who say the right words, but those who do the right thing, he says. That's when the kingdom of God has come. If you meet a Muslim woman, if you meet a Hindu man who is living inside of that beautiful integration of the divine and the human, of spirit and matter, and has put them together inside of his own soul, not that the soul is there, but that person is what we used to call, you don't have to call them that, by the way, but for the sake of our own theology, we did. We called them anonymous Christians. Or in this old Baltimore catechism that I keep holding up, it seems to have disappeared, we called it baptism by desire. Isn't that interesting? Baptism by desire. That there were people, by the desires of their heart, that were led to the same baptismal experience, transformative experience, without ever joining the Christian religion or having water poured over their head. So Jesus' message for all religions is, first of all, that integration. Secondly, I do think, although the mystics of all religions get there, his teaching on love of enemies, on inclusivity, on forgiveness and nonviolence is his primary moral teaching. And if all the religions don't discover that soon, with 6.5 billion of us on this limited planet, we're going to commit collective suicide. We're going to be killing one another. So this message better be learned very quickly, first of all by Christians who claim they follow Jesus, but equally by Muslims and Jews and Hindus and Buddhists and all the rest. Buddhists tend to have learned that pretty well. Not always, though.
Martin McLaren in Sydney, Australia, where it's 4 a.m. in the morning right now.
Go to bed.
It says a contemplative practice appears to be a critical enabler of the emerging church. How do we learn how to practice contemplation?
Okay. As you know, that's our hopefully primary teaching here at the center. Not that we intended it to be, but we eventually needed it to be. Because when we first taught social justice, we realized that people could be for social justice inside of an oppositional mind. And no problem was solved. Because they then continued themselves as part of the problem. Still thinking dualistically, still needing to humiliate their enemies or to eliminate their enemies, which is no advance in consciousness. So, just a short teaching on Contemplation 101, basic. What we realize is that all human beings suffer from a primary addiction. It's not alcohol, it's not drugs, it's not even consumerism, as it looks like. But in fact, our primary addiction is our thinking. That this control tower of the mind is what we all become accustomed to, addicted to, and usually by your late teenage years, you've got your pattern down of how you process your information, how you take it in, what you eliminate, what you're afraid of, what gets access and what doesn't get access. That is Contemplation 101, that recognition. That this is your control tower, and that in fact, it does not proceed primarily by a love of truth. The mind proceeds by a love of control of the data. It likes to feel my data is the true data. And so it eliminates anything that is mysterious, anything that demands a little more of me, anything that leads me outside of my comfort zone, anything that I can't prove by the scientific method is right. Well, you've eliminated 90% of the data. Because all that gets in, therefore, if you don't learn contemplation, all that gets in is what you already agree with, how you already think. This is why people stop growing rather early. That human growth in terms of psyche and spirit and even mental growth. Ken Wilber says, the most you can hope for on a good day with a good person is that a person is willing to call 5% of their present ideas into question. At most, 5% of a good person on a good day. 95% is settled, all right? Don't you bring it up. I'm not willing to look at it or discuss it. That's what's happened to human nature when we stop teaching contemplation. Now, you say, well, did we need this to be taught in a formal way? My strong suspicion is that people who lived in nature, people who observed nature because they didn't have TVs and books to observe, they came to this contemplative mind almost naturally. Almost naturally. It was the over-reliance upon the head, the cerebral cortex in particular, which in the last 1,000 years, certainly the last 2,500 years, has made us over rely upon this part of the body to access truth. So what contemplation does, without eliminating the left brain, it says, let's start receiving the moment in a holistic way. Not just the left brain, but the right brain, right? The eyes, the ears, even the nose, the taking in, the sensing of the truth of the moment, the whole cellular knowing of truth. We used to call it women's intuition, but I think all people really have it. Women just developed it more. I think that's true, because they didn't rely as much as educated males did upon the left brain. So true contemplation is allowing you to know in a holistic way, and in fact so holistically that you don't eliminate the unknowing. Let me say it again. You don't eliminate the mysterious, that which you can't figure out. You let it stay there. You live without closure, without resolution, without settling all the dust. Say, I haven't figured that out. I just got to pray about that a little more. How many people do you know who give answers like that? We feel to show that we're educated, we got to, well, I think, well, I know this to be true. When in fact, we know very little to be true in this holistic way. So to pray, I really think, is to simply be present in a holistic way. Body, soul, mind, heart, as Jesus put it, by the way, to the moment. To not just love the Lord your God and your neighbor as yourself with your whole mind, but with your whole body, with your whole soul, and with your whole self. That's a different way of knowing, and it's what we call contemplation. I guess I didn't give you a practice, but if that's what you were asking for, primarily any practice that lessens your addiction to your calculating, thinking, organizing, fixing mind. Any practice that does that lessens your reliance upon it, you'll be able to open the screen and receive reality in a much broader way.
So many good questions that keep coming in. But Elizabeth from Atlanta asks, there is an emerging sense of need and urgency of an inclusive, open Eucharist. Please share your thoughts on this subject.
You want to get me in trouble, don't you? Well, I probably already did, but here's what I mean by church protocol.